Adrian Carter came home after 9 long years working overseas. For months he had imagined this day. In the quiet moments between long shifts, in the loneliness of rented rooms, in airport lines, and in the tired silence that comes after a man has spent too many years carrying his life alone. He had replayed the scene in his head so many times that it felt almost real. He would pull up outside the old house. He would step onto the porch. He would knock once, then open the door before his mother could even reach it. She would turn, freeze in surprise, and then smile the way only mothers do when someone they love has finally returned from too far away. He had dreamed of wrapping his arms around her and holding her long enough to make up for everything time had stolen. He wanted that hug to say what words never fully can. That the worst was over, that the hard years had led somewhere, that her prayers had not been wasted, that he had survived, that he had built something, that he had come back strong enough to take the weight off her shoulders at last. He wanted to look her in the eyes and say, "You don't have to carry life by yourself anymore." But Adrian Carter was not prepared for what waited behind that front door. He was not prepared to find signs of children in the house where he had left only his mother. He was not prepared to hear laughter that did not belong to memory. And he was certainly not prepared for the truth that would turn his entire life upside down. In Evelyn Carter's house, mornings always began before the sun. At 4:30, while the street still belonged to darkness and silence, Evelyn was already awake. At 68, she no longer needed an alarm clock. Her body had learned responsibility so completely that it rose before fear, before pain, before doubt had time to argue. She would sit on the edge of her bed for a moment, letting her knees wake slowly, letting her back remember how to carry another day. Then she would stand, smooth the front of her faded robe, and move quietly toward the kitchen. The small house knew her footsteps. The floorboards creaked in familiar places. The hallway light flickered if you pulled the string too hard. The faucet in the sink dripped at a rhythm so constant it had become part of the home's breathing. The roof still leaked during heavy rain, though Evelyn had learned exactly where to place a basin before the first drop reached the floor. In the kitchen, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had repeated the same routine so often her hands no longer waited for instructions. Pot on the stove, bread out of the wrapper, eggs into the pan, cornbread from the night before wrapped carefully, juice bottles lined up, napkins counted, change purse checked. Every motion had purpose, every second mattered. Her hands told the story of her life better than any photograph could. The skin was rough, the knuckles swollen, the palms thickened by years of washing, lifting, scrubbing, kneading, carrying, holding, and doing whatever needed to be done. They were not elegant hands. They were faithful hands. The hands of a woman who had carried more than most people around her knew. The hands of someone who had learned long ago that love often looks less like speeches and more like labor. In the next room, 2 children slept beneath blankets she had mended 3 separate times. Their names were Ethan and Chloe, 9-year-old twins. And though they did not know it yet, the entire shape of their world rested on those tired hands. For 9 years, Evelyn had lived like this. 9 years of waking in darkness to make breakfast not only for the children, but for strangers too. 9 years of boiling eggs, frying patties, packing sandwiches, cutting cornbread, filling juice bottles, and loading everything onto a small wheeled cart whose left wheel squeaked when it turned. 9 years of walking 4 blocks to the bus station on Elm Street, where factory workers, drivers, cleaners, and laborers passed by before sunrise with coins in their pockets and no time to cook for themselves. $3 for an egg sandwich, $2 for cornbread, a little more for juice. It was never enough to make life easy, but with caution, sacrifice, and prayer, it was enough to keep life moving. And Evelyn knew how to stretch small things until they reached impossible distances. She stretched food. She stretched medicine. She stretched electricity bills. She stretched worn coats through another winter. She stretched hope across years that had no right to hold it. After the morning sales, she would return home, wash what needed washing, change what needed changing, and walk the twins to school. Ethan usually carried his own bag without complaint, though it always looked slightly too large on his shoulders. Chloe swung hers dramatically and talked almost the entire way, asking questions about everything she saw. Why did some houses get painted and others stay peeling? Why did the bus driver look sad? Why did grown-ups always say later when they meant no? Why did some children have fathers waiting at the gate and some didn't? Evelyn had answers for many things, not for all. Later, she would collect them from school, one hand holding Chloe's fingers while Ethan walked beside her, quiet and watchful, noticing cracked pavement, bent signs, loose fence panels, and details no one had taught him to look for. Back home, she cooked dinner, checked homework, scrubbed uniforms, made lists in her head, counted bills twice, and somehow held the house together even while time tried to pull it apart, board by board. The roof leaked. The kitchen tiles were cracked. The wallpaper in the hallway had peeled back at the corners. The back steps leaned slightly to the left. The bathroom lock stuck in damp weather. But Evelyn made life work the way only strong, quiet people know how. When school asked for money for a trip, she sold an old necklace. When Ethan needed new shoes because his toes pressed against the front, she told the pharmacist she would pay for her own tablets next week. When Chloe wanted a yellow backpack because the zipper on the old one kept catching, Evelyn stayed up late repairing it first, then bought the yellow one anyway when she saw how longingly the child had looked through the shop window. No one saw most of the sacrifices. That is how real sacrifice often happens, not with witnesses, just with choices. Ethan and Chloe were twins, but almost every visible thing about them seemed different. Ethan was quiet, observant, careful. He had the kind of mind that measured before it moved. If a toy broke, he wanted to understand why. If a door squeaked, he noticed exactly when it started. He watched people's faces closely, listened fully, and asked only the questions he truly wanted answered. He had a habit of tilting his head slightly when thinking, as though trying to line up the world until it made sense. Chloe was fearless where Ethan was cautious. She spoke her thoughts almost as quickly as she had them. She asked hard questions at the wrong times and had never once in her life understood why truth should wait politely for permission. She laughed loudly, cried honestly, argued passionately, and recovered quickly. If Ethan studied the world, Chloe challenged it. They were different in voice, movement, and temperament. But they were united by one simple truth. They both loved Evelyn without reservation. To them, she was not just their grandmother. She was morning and dinner, and safety and discipline and medicine and comfort and advice and home. They knew she worked hard. Children always know more than adults think. They saw it in the way she lowered herself into chairs at night, in the way she sometimes pressed a hand against her side when she thought no one was looking, in the careful way she stood up after kneeling, in the long pauses before she answered when bills were on the table. But children do not always understand the full weight someone carries for them. They only know who keeps showing up. And Evelyn always showed up. One cold morning, while pale light was just beginning to touch the kitchen window, Chloe sat at the table and asked the question that had been waiting silently in that house for years. "Grandma," she said, tracing circles in spilled sugar with one fingertip, "do we have a father?" The pan hissed softly on the stove. Evelyn paused for only a second, but in that second, years passed through her face. Then she turned the eggs gently and said, "You have me." Chloe frowned. "I know that. I mean, a father." In the doorway, Ethan stood already dressed for school, one sock slightly lower than the other, listening without pretending not to. Evelyn placed eggs onto plates and turned to face them. She looked at Chloe's serious expression, then at Ethan's silent one. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "Some things take time to explain the right way." Chloe opened her mouth to ask again, but Evelyn added, "And when the time is right, I will tell you everything." There was something in her eyes that stopped further questions. Children know when grown-up silence means pain. Under Evelyn's bed sat an old gray metal box with scratches across the lid and rust beginning near the hinges. Inside were 2 birth certificates, a photograph of a young pregnant woman standing beside a grocery store in the rain, a small hospital bracelet, and a folded letter written years ago in Evelyn's careful handwriting. It began with the words, "Adrian, my son." She had written it long ago. She had never sent it. 9 years earlier, Adrian himself had been 23 and desperate to escape the kind of poverty that makes every dream feel delayed, rationed, or foolish. He loved his mother. He loved the house with its tired walls and stubborn heat and history in every corner. He loved the neighborhood where everybody knew his name, and everybody also knew how little opportunity there was to become anything more than tired. Love, however, does not erase pressure. And pressure had wrapped itself around Adrian for years. He had watched Evelyn grow older too fast. He had watched unpaid bills gather in drawers. He had watched winter reach through broken insulation. He had watched men his age take jobs that kept them alive, but never moved them forward. When he first heard about overseas construction work that promised real money, he tried not to hope too much. Jobs like that always sounded larger than real life. But the recruiter had numbers, contracts, photographs, stories of men who came back and bought trucks, repaired houses, started companies. Adrian was young enough to believe effort still guaranteed reward if a man simply worked harder than fear. So he said yes. Almost before he had given himself time to be afraid. He told Evelyn at the same kitchen table where Ethan and Chloe now ate toast before school. She sat across from him in her blue apron, hands folded, listening carefully without interrupting. "It's good money," Adrian said. "Real money. If I stay focused, I can save. I can send some back every month. I can fix the house, maybe even buy a second one later. I won't be gone long." "How long?" Evelyn asked quietly. "A year," he said. "Maybe less." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and helped him pack. That was who Evelyn had always been. Not the kind of mother who tried to hold her child in place with guilt. The kind who loved enough to let him go if going gave him a chance. At first, Adrian called every week. He told her about blistering heat, about concrete, steel, and long shifts that started before dawn. He told her about sharing rooms with men from 4 different countries, about missing home-cooked food, about sleeping so deeply after work that dreams felt like accidents. He asked about the house, the neighbors, church, the old peach tree out front. He promised he was saving money. He promised he would be back soon. He promised he would fix everything. And he believed himself. But life rarely consults the promises people make while they are still innocent about time. 6 months became 9. 9 became 14. Then another contract came. Then another opportunity. Then one smart risk led to another. Adrian learned the work quickly, then learned how to manage it, then how to lead crews, then how to buy and resell equipment, then how to take smaller contracts under someone else's umbrella. Money began to move in a way he had never known. For the first time in his life, the future looked less like survival and more like structure. Back home, Evelyn listened to his voice through cheap phone lines and told herself a little more time would be worth it. Then, 4 months after Adrian left, there was a storm. Rain came down in sheets so heavy the street looked silver under it. The gutters overflowed. The porch steps shone dark with water. Evelyn was drying plates in the kitchen when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, a young woman stood there shivering in the rain, one hand against her stomach. "I'm Naomi Parker," she said. Evelyn knew the name. Adrian had mentioned Naomi once or twice before leaving. Casually. The way young men sometimes speak about important people before they are ready to admit how important they are. Evelyn remembered the slight change in his voice when he had said the name. But she had never met the girl. Naomi was exhausted, frightened, soaked to the skin, and heavily pregnant. "I'm sorry to come like this," she said, voice shaking. "I didn't know where else to go." Evelyn stepped aside at once. "Come in." Naomi sat at the kitchen table wrapped in one of Evelyn's towels while rain rattled against the window. Her hands trembled around the cup of tea Evelyn set before her. It took time before the whole story emerged. She had been living with a cousin, but that arrangement had ended badly. She was carrying twins. She had tried to reach Adrian before he left, then after, but by then everything had become uncertain and messy and humiliating. She had no stable home, no real savings, no family able to do much more than offer sympathy. She was afraid. More than that, she was ashamed of how afraid she was. At one point, eyes lowered to the table, Naomi confessed in a voice so quiet Evelyn almost missed it. "I thought maybe I should give them up. Maybe someone else could give them a better life." Evelyn sat very still. Then she said the words that changed all of their lives. "Those are my son's children." Naomi looked up. "They are family," Evelyn said. "And family does not get left behind." Naomi cried then. Not dramatically, just with the broken relief of someone who had been bracing for rejection and found a place to sit down instead. From that day on, the house changed. Not all at once. First, it changed by one toothbrush. Then by a second pair of shoes near the back door. Then by doctor visits, folded baby clothes, borrowed books about twin pregnancies, and lists of names written on scraps of paper. For a little while, there was a strange kind of hope in the house. Naomi tried. She truly did. She helped where she could. She washed dishes. She folded laundry. She sat at the table with Evelyn and asked practical questions in a frightened voice. What if the labor came early? What if one baby was sick? What if she was not good at being a mother? What if love was not enough? Evelyn answered what she could and simply sat beside her when no answer would help. The twins were born on a cold February morning. The hospital smelled of bleach and warmed blankets. Outside, the trees looked stripped bare by winter. Inside, life arrived in two loud, fragile pieces. Ethan came first. Quiet, alert, almost solemn even as a newborn. Chloe came moments later, furious at the world for making her wait. Evelyn held one in each arm and felt something split open inside her chest. Love, fear, responsibility, all at once. She meant to tell Adrian immediately. She truly did. She even took paper out that same week. She wrote half a letter, tore it up, started again, stopped, waited for a better moment, a clearer way, a softer entry into a truth that seemed too large to fit in any ordinary sentence. And the longer she waited, the heavier the words became. Naomi tried during the beginning. She came often. She fed the babies, sang to them in a hesitant but tender voice, sat for long stretches watching them sleep, talked about taking classes, about finding work, about building a life stable enough to stand on. Evelyn wanted to believe all of it. Sometimes she did, but real life is heavier than hope alone. Fatigue settled into Naomi like fog. Bills frightened her. The babies cried in shifts that dissolved nights into fragments. Depression, though no one in that house used the word, moved into her eyes. Her visits became irregular, her calls shorter, her promises thinner. One afternoon, when the twins were still small enough to fit side by side in a single crib, Naomi came over unusually quiet. She held Ethan for a long time, then Chloe, then both together as best she could. She kissed their heads one after the other. When she finally looked at Evelyn, her face had the terrible stillness of someone surrendering something she does not know how to keep. "I can't," she whispered. Evelyn understood more than Naomi said. After that, Naomi slowly disappeared from their lives. Not in one dramatic moment, just in the ordinary way some people vanish when pain becomes larger than their ability to bear witness to it. So there were 3 of them in the house now: Evelyn, Ethan, Chloe. And far away, Adrian remained busy building a future he did not know already had children waiting inside it. He sent money regularly. Not enough to transform everything, but enough to help. Sometimes Evelyn used it for bills, sometimes for school clothes, once for a medical prescription Naomi had needed before disappearing, once for part of the twins' vaccination appointments, once for roof patching after a storm. And every single time the phone rang, Evelyn told herself, "This is the day I tell him everything." But when she heard the tired pride in Adrian's voice, the hunger in him to build something real before coming home empty-handed again, fear interrupted courage. She imagined him dropping everything too soon. She imagined him returning before he had secured his future. She imagined him resenting the life waiting for him. She imagined him not resenting it and still losing everything he had been working toward. So she delayed. Then the delay itself became part of the problem. Years passed. Ethan learned to read early and preferred instruction manuals to fairy tales. He could sit for an hour sketching buses, cranes, rooftops, and machines he had only seen briefly. He loved order, straight lines, exact proportions, things that fit. Chloe learned to climb before Evelyn wanted her to, talk before people were ready, negotiate before adults admitted she was negotiating. She made friends quickly, defended Ethan fiercely, and once told a teacher that if the school wanted parents at a meeting, then Grandma counted twice, because she did the work of two people. Evelyn never knew whether to laugh or cry when Chloe said things like that. At school events, other families came in clusters. Mothers, fathers, step-parents, uncles, older siblings. Evelyn came alone, usually carrying one extra sweater because one of the twins would forget theirs. She sat through school assemblies with tired legs and proud eyes. She listened to teachers describe Ethan as gifted but reserved, Chloe as bright but full of strong opinions. Evelyn always smiled at that phrase because it sounded like something polite people said when they meant unstoppable. Sometimes Ethan asked quieter questions than Chloe. Not often. But once, while helping Evelyn carry groceries in from the porch, he said, "Did our father know us when we were babies?" Evelyn nearly dropped the bread. She looked at him. "Why do you ask that?" He shrugged in that small, careful way he had when something mattered too much to expose fully. "Just wondering." Evelyn set the groceries down. "No," she said softly. "He didn't." Ethan thought about that for several seconds. Then he asked, "Was that his choice?" Evelyn could not answer immediately. "Not exactly," she said at last. Ethan accepted that without pressing. But from then on, Evelyn noticed him studying old photographs in the hallway more often. Years also settled onto Evelyn herself. She grew older in increments too small to notice day by day and too large to ignore once a year had passed. Her blood pressure crept upward. Her ankles swelled during humid weather. Some afternoons she sat down for just a minute and woke to find 30 minutes gone. Yet she never stopped. Not truly. There was always breakfast to prepare, socks to match, fees to pay, forms to sign, uniforms to mend, medicines to remember, and two children whose lives ran on the unseen machinery of her devotion. Then one Wednesday, on the walk home from school, life gave her a warning. The air was warm, too warm for the season. Chloe was talking about a classmate who had cheated at a spelling game and then lied about it badly. Ethan was describing a bridge he had seen in a book. Evelyn listened, smiling faintly. And then, all at once, the world shifted. First came the strange lightness in her head, then the heaviness in her chest, then the feeling that her knees no longer fully belonged to her. She reached for the nearest wall and sat down hard on a low garden ledge before the street could tilt any further. Chloe stopped speaking instantly. "Grandma?" Ethan was beside her in seconds. "Sit back," he said with startling calm. "Breathe slow." A passerby noticed, then another. Someone called an ambulance. At the hospital, under white lights that made everything feel exposed, a doctor with kind eyes reviewed her tests and told her what her body had been trying to say for a long time. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. Her iron was low. Her exhaustion was severe. "If you keep going this way," he said gently, "the next time may be much more serious." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "I have 2 children at home." The doctor nodded. "Then they need you healthy." That night, while the twins stayed with a neighbor, Evelyn lay in a hospital bed listening to the thin mechanical sounds of a place where people came only when something had already gone too far. She stared at the ceiling and faced the truth she had carried around for years without looking at directly. If something happened to her, Adrian might never know. The children might grow up with unanswered questions. The secret might simply die where she did. And that, suddenly, felt less like protection and more like theft. So in the stillness of that room, Evelyn made herself a promise. She would tell him. No more waiting for the perfect moment. No more rehearsing words she never sent. No more hiding true things in metal boxes. 3 weeks later, Adrian came home. It was a bright Tuesday morning when his dark blue pickup truck turned onto the street and slowed in front of the old house. He had done well for himself. That much was obvious before he even stepped out. The truck bed was stacked with lumber, paint, replacement panels, tools, roofing sheets, and sealed boxes labeled with hardware brands Evelyn had never been able to afford. In the passenger seat were gifts: a warm shawl, imported chocolates, envelopes of money, vitamins, a kitchen mixer she would probably insist she did not need. Adrian sat behind the wheel for a second longer than necessary, looking at the house. Smaller than he remembered. Older, too, but still home. He smiled to himself, grabbed the gifts, and stepped out. Then he noticed the bicycles. A red one and a blue one leaning beneath the window. Small shoes near the front step. Paper stars and children's drawings taped inside the glass. And from somewhere inside the house came the clear sound of a child laughing. He stopped. His first thought was that perhaps a neighbor's grandchildren were visiting. His second thought arrived colder. Why did it not look temporary? He walked slowly to the door and knocked. Evelyn opened it, expecting Mrs. Green from next door returning a bowl. Instead, she saw Adrian. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then all the missing years rushed through the space between them. She touched his face first, as if confirming he was not another delayed dream. Adrian set everything down and held her. He was broader now, stronger, lined by years of work and sun and endurance. But in the shape of the hug, he was still her son. Evelyn felt every single absent year inside that embrace, and, for one brief, terrible instant, wished she could keep him standing on the porch forever, long enough to have him back without yet losing the silence that had protected them all and harmed them all at once. She brought him inside, made tea, let him talk. And Adrian did talk. About contracts, about business, about crews, about nights sleeping on paperwork and mornings waking to opportunity. About how he had finally reached a point where he could do more than survive. He spoke with pride, and Evelyn was proud. Proud enough that the guilt hurt more. Then, halfway through breakfast, he asked casually, "Whose bikes are outside?" Evelyn kept spreading butter on toast. "Some children I've been helping," she said. "A friend needed support for a while." "A while?" She nodded. "How old are they?" 9. The word landed between them harder than it should have. Adrian looked at her, then away. Something in him noticed the timing before his mind wanted to. Still, he said nothing. The first week passed with Adrian throwing himself into repairs from sunrise to sunset. He worked like a man trying to redeem time through labor. He replaced broken roof sections, reinforced the back steps, fixed the fence that had leaned for years, rehung the kitchen window that never sealed properly, patched the hallway ceiling, and repainted the peeling front wall. Neighbors slowed to wave. Men from down the street shouted greetings. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window with deep pride and rising fear. Every nail he drove into that house seemed to bring him closer to the truth buried inside it. When Ethan and Chloe first came home from school and found him on a ladder scraping paint, Evelyn introduced him carefully. "This is Adrian," she said. "He's helping with the repairs." Chloe accepted that for perhaps 30 seconds. "You talk like Grandma," she said. Adrian laughed. "Do I?" "A little." Ethan said nothing, but he looked at Adrian, then at the framed hallway photograph of a younger man in a blue work shirt, then back again. Something quiet inside him aligned. Over the next days, Adrian found himself drawn toward the twins in ways he did not understand. He told himself it was natural. Children in the house changed its center of gravity. But there was more to it than that. Chloe's boldness unsettled and amused him. Ethan's careful silence felt strangely familiar. The way the boy studied door hinges, measuring tape, tool placement, and roof angles made Adrian pause more than once. One afternoon, Ethan stood beside him while he repaired a loose porch rail. "You're bracing the joint wrong," Ethan said quietly. Adrian blinked. "I am?" Ethan pointed. "If the pressure comes from that side, the split will widen." Adrian stared at the boy, then at the wood. Then he laughed softly. "You might be right." Ethan did not smile much, but something in his face sharpened with interest. Chloe, meanwhile, asked Adrian questions with the force of cross-examination. Where had he been? Was overseas hot? Did he know how to cook? Was he rich? Why did grown men always think ladders fixed everything? Adrian answered what he could, amused and increasingly unsettled by how comfortable they felt in the house. Their things were everywhere, but not in a careless way. A toothbrush cup with 3 brushes and one smaller pink one. Height marks on a door frame going back years. Homework lists in Evelyn's handwriting. Medicine reminders stuck near the kettle. Shoes lined up under a bench. This was not temporary. This was family life. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Chloe dropped a notebook in the kitchen, and loose papers spilled across the floor. Adrian bent automatically to help gather them. Most were school worksheets. One was a drawing of a bicycle with impossible wings. Then he reached for an official folded document tucked into the back cover. He should not have looked, but he did. Ethan Adrian Carter. The room around him seemed to narrow. He read it again. Mother, Naomi Parker. Father, blank. Adrian's hand went cold. Naomi. Carter. 9 years old. The middle name. His own name. He passed the document back with a face he hoped looked normal and walked outside before his thoughts could show themselves. He stood near the fence he had just repaired and let the truth begin assembling itself piece by piece. Naomi. The stormy end to their relationship before he left. The calls missed. The distance. The assumptions. The timing. The children's faces. Ethan's measured seriousness. Chloe's fearless stare. The jawline. The eyes. The tilt of the head when thinking. He saw himself. Not metaphorically. Literally. That night he said nothing. He sat through dinner. Listened to Chloe criticize peas. Heard Ethan quietly correct a math problem. Watched Evelyn serve them without asking who wanted seconds because she already knew. Every ordinary movement in that room became evidence. Adrian felt anger rise, then confusion, then grief so sudden it nearly made him stand up from the table. But when he looked at Evelyn's hands, those same worn hands he had spent years trying to relieve from a distance, he swallowed the confrontation. Not yet. Evelyn knew before he spoke. Mothers know the difference between silence and altered silence. She saw it in the extra pause before his answers, in the way he studied the twins, now not as children in general, but these children in particular. in the wait inside the room after the dishes were done. That night, after everyone slept, Evelyn went to her room, pulled the old metal box from under the bed, and set it in her lap. She touched the letter but did not unfold it. She already knew every word. By morning, her decision was final. For the first time in years, she did not go to the bus station. Adrian came downstairs expecting to hear the usual sounds of pans and hurried movement. Instead, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with tea already poured. "You're not going out?" he asked. "Not today," she said. "Sit down, Adrian." There was no use pretending now. He sat. Evelyn placed the gray metal box between them. "There is something I need you to understand," she said. "Read the letter first, then we'll talk." Adrian opened the box slowly. Inside were the birth certificates, Naomi's photograph, a hospital bracelet, the letter. He read every line. He read about the rainy day Naomi had arrived, about the pregnancy, about the twins' birth, about Naomi trying, then fading, about the years Evelyn had raised the children alone, about school forms signed with trembling hands, about nights counting coins, about medicines delayed, about the silver watch she sold, about the first fever, the first school day, the first lost tooth, the first bicycle, the first question about their father. At the end, Evelyn had written, "I was wrong to wait this long, but I could not let your children drift through the world with no one to hold them. They are good children, Adrian. Better than this silence. I am tired, my son. I am done keeping true things in boxes. Please come home. And this time, really come home." When Adrian finished reading, he set the letter down and stared at the table as if looking hard enough might reverse time. For a long while, he said nothing. Then he covered his face with both hands. Evelyn braced herself for anger, for shouting, for blame, for a son's wounded accusation. Instead, when Adrian finally looked up, his eyes were red. "9 years," he said. "Yes," Evelyn answered. "They were here all this time?" "Yes. I missed everything." The words came out heavy and stunned. Evelyn did not soften them. "Yes," she said again, because truth sometimes requires no decoration. Then came the question she had feared most. "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn looked at him honestly. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Afraid you would come back before you had built a life strong enough to stand on. Afraid all your effort would collapse before it had a chance to become something solid. I saw how badly you needed a way out. I told myself I was protecting you. Maybe part of me was. But another part was just afraid of what the truth would change. It was not my choice to keep from you. I know that now. I should have told you." Adrian sat motionless. Then he pushed his chair back, sank down beside her, and wrapped his arms around her. Evelyn had held herself together for so long that when she finally cried, it was almost soundless. The kind of crying that comes not from drama, but from exhaustion, from relief, from a burden finally shared. They stayed that way in the kitchen while morning light slowly widened across the floorboards. At last, Adrian asked, voice rough, "What do I say to them?" Evelyn answered gently, "Today, you do not need perfect words. Today, you just need to be here." So he stayed. That afternoon, he did not touch a single tool. Instead, he walked through the house as if seeing it for the first time. In Ethan's room, he found notebooks filled with careful drawings of cranes, bridges, scaffolding, rooftops, and machines. Measurements penciled in the margins, small corrections erased and redone. On the wall hung a shelf Adrian himself had built as a teenager, now slightly crooked, holding Ethan's books in perfect order. In Chloe's room, he found color everywhere. Notes taped to the mirror, bright ribbons, a collection of stones she believed looked like animals, a paper crown, a list titled, "Rules Grown-ups Should Follow," including, "Tell the truth," "Don't say maybe if you mean no," and "Pancakes count as dinner if the day was hard." Adrian stood very still in both rooms, feeling the pain of absence in ways no letter could fully deliver. When the twins came home from school, Evelyn asked them to sit down. Her hands were folded tightly enough to whiten the knuckles. Adrian sat beside her. The children sensed seriousness immediately. Evelyn told them the truth simply, because children deserve honesty more than performance. Adrian was not just the man fixing the house, he was her son. He was their father. He had gone away before he knew they were coming. She had kept the truth too long. That part had been wrong. Then she looked at both of them and said, "Nothing you feel right now is wrong." The room went very quiet. Chloe spoke first. "You didn't know about us?" Adrian shook his head. "No, I didn't know. But if I had known, I would have come." Chloe held his gaze with unusual stillness. "Are you going to leave again?" It was such a small question, and such a huge one. Adrian answered without hesitation. "No, I'm not leaving again." Chloe nodded once, not because all doubt had vanished, but because she was measuring him and had decided, for now, to let the answer stand. Then Adrian looked at Ethan. "I'm sorry I wasn't here." Ethan met his eyes, said nothing for several seconds, then reached into his school bag, pulled out a notebook, opened to a drawing of a construction crane, and slid it across the table. Adrian looked down. "The proportions are right," he said quietly. "That's hard to do." "I measured it," Ethan replied. "I can tell." That was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. The days that followed were awkward sometimes, warm sometimes, uncertain often. Real family life has never been built on one emotional conversation. It is built through repetition, through breakfast, through showing up again the next day, through keeping promises so small they would seem invisible to outsiders. Adrian began learning the rhythms of the house. Ethan needed time before questions. Chloe asked difficult things at bedtime. Neither child liked syrup touching eggs. Evelyn forgot her afternoon tablet if no one reminded her. The back gate stuck in damp weather. The school wanted parental signatures on Friday folders. Adrian inserted himself carefully, not too fast, not too slow. He helped at the bus station in the mornings. At first, the workers there stared, then grinned, then clapped him on the back when they realized who he was. "So the boy finally came home," one old customer said. "He did," Evelyn answered, unable to stop smiling. For the first time in years, she no longer had to lift the heavy pot alone. Adrian set up the folding table, handed out sandwiches, counted change, carried supplies, and walked beside her on the return trip, pushing the squeaking cart while she moved with less strain than she had in years. At school pickup, children began whispering. Chloe, never one to waste an opportunity, announced to 3 classmates within an hour that the man with the truck was her father and that he knew how to fix roofs and also admitted when he was wrong, which apparently made him rare. Ethan did not talk about Adrian much at school, but one teacher noticed that his drawings changed. There were more people in them now, not just structures, homes, porches, windows lit from inside. One evening, Adrian tried helping Chloe with homework and discovered she took correction as a personal insult. "That answer is incomplete," he said. "No, it is creative." It asked for 3 reasons. I gave the best one, quality over quantity. From the other side of the table, Ethan muttered, "That's not how school works." Chloe glared at him. Adrian laughed. The tension dissolved. Another evening, Adrian sat beside Ethan on the back steps while the boy worked on a broken toy truck. "You could glue that axle," Adrian said. "It would break again," Ethan replied. Adrian nodded. "So what would you do?" Ethan looked at him cautiously, then said, "Replace the pin." "With what?" Ethan pulled a bent nail from his pocket. Adrian smiled slowly. "You've been thinking about this a while." Ethan gave the smallest of shrugs. "Since Tuesday." They repaired the truck together. Not much was said. A great deal was built. Then, one Saturday, while sorting through old things in the hallway closet, Chloe found a box of photographs. She brought them to the sitting room floor and began laying them out one by one. There was Evelyn, younger and straighter-backed. There was Adrian as a skinny teenager in a graduation shirt. There was a photograph of the house before the fence leaned. There were no baby photographs of the twins with Adrian, of course. That absence sat there too. Chloe looked from the pictures to Adrian. "You really missed all of it." "Yes," he said. "Does it hurt?" Adrian considered lying. Instead, he said, "Yes." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "Good." He blinked. "Good? If it didn't hurt, that would be worse." Adrian looked at her for a long moment and then laughed softly, though his eyes shone. "That is a very Chloe thing to say." "I know," she replied. Weeks passed. The house changed. Not just in paint and repairs, but in atmosphere. Adrian installed a proper reading light in Ethan's room and a stronger shelf for his books and models. He painted Chloe's room bright yellow because she declared that pale yellow looked afraid of itself. He fixed the bathroom lock, sealed the leaking window, replaced the bent mailbox, and built a bench for the porch wide enough for Evelyn to sit on in the evenings without her knees complaining quite so much. He also did quieter repairs. He organized medicine refills, set reminders on his phone for school dates, opened a savings account for the twins, began paperwork to formalize what his heart had already decided. He was not visiting. He was staying. Some nights, after the children slept, he and Evelyn talked in the kitchen over tea. About Naomi, about guilt, about the years between them. Evelyn told him things she had never told anyone fully. How Chloe used to cry if separated from Ethan, even for a minute. How Ethan had once stayed awake all night during Evelyn's fever because he thought if he slept, something bad might happen. How the twins had both once saved coins in a jar labeled Grandma Rest Money, though there had never been enough in it to buy rest. Adrian listened with the grief of a father learning his children in reverse. One evening he asked, "Do you think Naomi ever thinks about them?" Evelyn stirred her tea slowly. "Yes," she said. "I think some loves fail in action without disappearing in feeling." Adrian sat with that for a while. He did not ask again. Then came the afternoon that changed everything in a smaller, more ordinary, and therefore more powerful way. Chloe was riding too fast down the front path, despite at least 3 warnings from both Adrian and Evelyn. The front wheel hit a loose edge near the step. She fell hard, skinning her knee badly. For half a second, there was stunned silence. Then the cry came. Adrian reached her almost before sound fully left her throat. He lifted her into his arms without thinking. Chloe, who hated appearing weak, buried her face in his shoulder and cried the helpless cry children save for moments when pain and trust arrive together. He carried her inside, sat her on the counter, washed the wound gently, blew on the sting of antiseptic, and listened as she complained tearfully that all medical supplies were unfairly designed to make children suffer. "That seems like a serious design flaw," Adrian said solemnly. She sniffed. "Exactly." From the doorway, Evelyn watched him soothe her, steady and instinctive, and something inside her finally unclenched. Not because the lost years were repaired. They were not. Not because regret had vanished. It had not. But because the burden was no longer hers alone. A few days later, Ethan asked Adrian if he wanted to see the model bridge he had been building from scrap wood. Adrian followed him to the back table, where pieces lay arranged with exact spacing. "I know it's not perfect," Ethan said quickly. Adrian crouched down, studying the joints. "No," he said, "it's not perfect." Ethan's face fell. Then Adrian added, "It's promising, which is better." Ethan looked up. "Perfection is where work ends," Adrian said. "Promise is where work begins." Together they spent 2 hours improving the model. Adrian showed him how cross-bracing worked under pressure. Ethan immediately understood. By evening, the bridge held more weight than either of them expected. When it did, Ethan smiled fully, rare enough that Evelyn noticed from across the room and pretended not to. Trust did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. A school meeting Adrian attended without being asked twice. A rainy morning when he remembered both lunchboxes and Evelyn's umbrella. A late-night fever when he stayed awake taking turns with cool cloths. A Sunday when he let Chloe braid his hair badly just because she asked. A Tuesday when Ethan handed him a broken lamp before asking Grandma. Little proofs. That is how families heal. Not through one dramatic promise, through repeated presence. Months later, the bus station crowd had come to expect Adrian beside Evelyn. Some mornings he handled the change while she poured juice. Some mornings he insisted she sit while he served. Workers who had bought breakfast from Evelyn for years began greeting the twins too when they came by during school holidays. "That your boy?" one man asked Evelyn quietly, nodding toward Adrian as he laughed at something Chloe said. She looked at him, then at Adrian, then at the children. "Yes," she said, "my boy." At home, the evenings grew gentler. 4 cups of tea instead of 1. Homework at the table. Ordinary arguments over vegetables. Chloe talking too much. Ethan pretending not to listen while hearing everything. Adrian on the floor repairing something that did not urgently need repair. Evelyn watching them all with a face that had finally learned how to rest, while others carried part of the day. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Adrian found the gray metal box still on the top shelf of Evelyn's closet. "Do you want me to get rid of this?" he asked. Evelyn thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Not yet." he brought it down anyway and sat beside her. They looked through it together. The photograph of Naomi, the hospital bracelet, the unsent letter, the papers, the years. Finally, Adrian folded the letter and placed it back inside. "This box held a secret too long," he said. Evelyn nodded. "But it also held us until we were ready to face it." She looked at him with quiet surprise. "Maybe." Then Adrian closed the lid. "No more boxes," he said. "No more boxes," Evelyn agreed. Winter came again, but the house met it differently this time. The roof held, the windows sealed. There was wood stacked properly out back. There were heavier blankets. There was money for medicine without panic. There was laughter in rooms that had once held only endurance. Near Christmas, the school held a family program. Children sang songs off-key. Parents waved at the wrong times. Chloe overperformed every line. Ethan sang only when necessary. At the end, families gathered for tea and biscuits in the hall. A volunteer asked the twins, "Who should I list on the family photo board?" Chloe answered first, of course. "Grandma Evelyn, our dad Adrian, and us." The woman smiled and wrote the names down. Adrian stood a few feet away, pretending not to react. But Evelyn saw him look down quickly, just once, the way people do when joy arrives in a place that still carries old pain. That night, back home, Evelyn made tea for 4. One for herself, one for Adrian, one for Chloe, one for Ethan, weak and sweet, just how he liked it. She carried them into the sitting room where her family was gathered. Chloe was talking. Ethan was listening. Adrian sat on the floor beside them with an instruction manual he was not really reading. The room held the ordinary sounds people often overlook until they have gone too long without them. Evelyn sat down slowly and looked around. For 9 years, she had carried the truth alone. She had carried it in the dark before sunrise, in long walks to the bus station, in counted dollars and delayed medicines, in patched coats and aching knees, in school forms and unpaid repairs, in the silence between phone calls, in prayers whispered too softly for anyone else to hear. She had carried it in guilt, in fear, in love. Now the truth was finally in the open, and the house had not fallen apart. Instead, it had become fuller. The lost years could not be returned. That part remained true. Adrian had missed first steps, first words, birthdays, fevers, school mornings, lost teeth, and all the little sacred moments childhood never repeats. Naomi was still gone, living somewhere beyond the reach of apology or easy repair. Some wounds stayed part of the story even after healing began. But another chapter had opened, and this one was still being written. Adrian looked across the room at his mother. Evelyn looked back at him. Neither needed to say much. Some truths are spoken long before words arrive. They are spoken in the way someone notices your silence and does not force it open. In the way someone makes you tea without asking. In the way a child reaches for your hand without thinking. In the way love shows up after time has failed, after distance has lied, after fear has made poor choices, after life has turned harder than anyone planned. Because in the end, that was the truth hidden inside this family all along. Love had been there the whole time. Tired, imperfect, late in some ways, quiet in others, wounded, persistent, working before dawn, waiting through years, holding children, holding grief, holding hope, and still somehow strong enough to survive 9 years. Strong enough to outlast silence. Strong enough to forgive what time could not restore. Strong enough at last to bring everyone home.